Okay, we're recording.
So good evening, everyone. We are here for the Region 7 Stakeholder Advisory Committee. It is Wednesday, January 18th. We've got our agenda in front of us here, so I'm going to call us to order. We'll start with, let me keep reading over our guidelines since you're on the bottom. We've been doing this long enough, I think everybody's programmed.
Yeah.
So as we start these meetings, we always ask for anyone in the public who'd like to make comments. This is our opportunity to do so. Dr. Desiree, do we have anyone online? Some guests?
We don't. I don't see any attendees here, so
Okay.
looks like it's just us.
Great. I know people sometimes watch the recording of this, so I just want to remind everyone in the public that we welcome their comments and they're able to provide those to us either at the beginning of these meetings or by contacting us through the website. And our location is Region 7 at arundelcounty.org, aa.county.org, or by mail. You can reach out to us through that or contact any of us through the feed page for Region 7. Find emails for all of us. Having no comment tonight, I'm going to close public comment. Open up old business. Old business for us is approval of the meeting notes. And the meeting that we have notes from was from January 9th, which was most recent. And so that's where we went through some old business items, some of which will carry over today. And then also presentation. What was going on at Coal Town Center, which was really helpful to the people who were here, and if you didn't see it, it's probably worth your time to take a look at it. So we had meetings include all of that information. Looking for any comments or corrections to the notes as they're presented. I don't see anyone who has a comment for that. So with that, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes as written. So we have the first for me and the second, and then we're going to go ahead and adopt those into our record. So you guys can again be able to find those on our website. Patrick or Desiree, do we have any other old business?
I was going to make one quick announcement now rather than hold it till the end of the meeting.
Sure.
At the last meeting, I mentioned that our planning and zoning officer, Steve Ziegler, had resigned. We do have a new planning and zoning officer who has been appointed and will be starting tomorrow. Her name is Jenny Jarkowski, and she's coming to us from Hartford County. And I have yet to meet her, so that is all I can tell you about that. But I did want to at least let you all know that that's underway.
So she's appointed by the county executive? Is that
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to have
She's really
leadership.
appointed by the chief administrative officer. Okay. Who is basically the chief of staff for the county.
So it's good to have some leadership there. It's nice sort of some continuity. That's a struggle.
That's quick.
Any other old business from anyone else in the room online with us? Great, so that's going to close out our old business. Now, our first order of new business is the finalization of the vision statement. So for those of you who were not present for the last meeting, we had a draft that Desiree was kind of put together, and then we worked through some adjustments to that. I think we tried to capture everyone's comments. I think it's a nice statement. So I'll let Desiree, you want to talk about that at all? Or
Yeah, I think you kind of covered it, but just for anyone who wasn't here at our last meeting, we did have a subcommittee initially work on this with Priscilla, Tony, and Anna. And so they kind of came up with the first draft, and then we sort of put some finishing touches on it last meeting. So we left it to all kind of sleep on it for the week and then vote on it today. So if anyone has any other thoughts at this point, now would be the time, otherwise we can move forward.
I think the ads, just to kind of summarize those, were some reorganization of some of the components of the text, and also to make sure we included the comment about, incorporating smart growth approaches to develop areas. So we make sure that we're providing some guidelines about how we incorporate development work as we do our work. Any comments on what we have on the screen?
Something that's bothered me ever since last meeting, and it's not something I want to die on, okay? It's just, when I read that make people want to live here, it's like we're forcing them. It would be like entice them, attract them to living here. It's like, you live here, that's the only thing. Otherwise, I think that's it. And that's just me, that's it's like we're forcing it. I mean, it sounds like it makes people want to live here.
Right there,
It's like it's forced. I don't care either way. That's just something that's really been nagging at me.
Others have thoughts?
Want to say entices people to
Attracts, entices.
Yeah.
I mean, how to use that. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, yeah, is there anything better option?
Invite is another.
Entices people to live here?
I've said all I'm gonna say. I think you're done right.
Makes it attractive for people to live here.
Yes, I'm.
Because we're
So, and access to our parks and waterways makes it attractive for people to live here.
That sounds good to me.
As long as it's just not that forceful. Make people think.
Sure. Okay. Makes it attractive for people to live here. Okay.
To live here. Make it attractive for people to want to live here.
Yeah.
I feel like we've just made it more wordy, but
It's too wordy.
Well, do we want to,
Real estate agent.
do we want to take a motion on that change
You guys fix it.
and then a motion on accepting the whole vision with that change to it? Is that the process that we should?
Is there a motion
Do
to
to-
accept visions? Do that first and then make a motion.
Oh, okay, sure. That works.
I think that
Yeah, so where we are is there a motion to accept the statement as we're looking at it now? Also. So we have a motion and a second, so that's a vote. So all in favor of accepting the statement as presented?
Wait. I thought you were gonna do the amendment.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I thought you were gonna do.
So you do the motion and then you do the amendment.
How it works is if there's a vote to accept it the way it is, that's how it goes.
Oh,
And if there's a vote not to accept it, there's a motion to make an adjustment. All in favor of it as it sits today? Okay, all opposed? So the motion doesn't carry, so the second motion is to amend the statement to revise where it says make people live here to, sorry, I don't have the word.
To make it attractive for people to live here.
So all in favor of the statement with the revision as read by Patrick? Is there a motion to go that way? Actually, I'll make a motion for that. What's that?
Chairperson can't make the motion.
My problems. Motion, forget it.
Thank you. It's driving me crazy.
The vice chair made it?
Yes, sorry, I need a motion.
Second.
So all in favor of the statement as revised? All opposed? The motion carries, and so we can make that adjustment. Certainly that on the website, that's just final format. So our next new item for discussion for the draft strategies for two areas tonight, housing and transportation. Want to do housing first?
Yeah, so very quickly, we sent you all out all of the housing and transportation strategies that we had drafted, and just a quick kind of recap of how we got to where we are. We had our various meetings with the different county agencies who came and discussed, issues related to their work and how these plans can support the work that they do. And that's where the draft strategies that we had worked on really came out of some of the information that we shared there, or that we heard there, the conversations that happened during those meetings, and then also some of the various public input opportunities that we had throughout the process, whether it was various survey instruments that were put out to the public, public forums, that kind of thing. All of that helped kind of inform our first cut at a draft set of strategies for housing and transportation. And so that was what we put into those two surveys that we sent out to you all to get your input. And thank you all for giving your input on those. We did get a form of responses from you all on all of those strategies that we received. And a quorum still is 8 members at this point that rated most of the strategies as either stand aside or better, up to agree with. And so out of all of those, we had what was our final number? It was 4 housing strategies that did not reach that quorum threshold. And so we want to start and focus in on those tonight to really kind of go through those and see if we can get some consensus around those.
Because
Yes.
there were a couple that I either didn't understand or thought we needed to discuss. So I gave it the lowest rating, which was
Mhm.
didn't support or wanted to discuss,
Mhm.
which would mean that it wouldn't up on that I liked it. I
Right.
liked it, but really wanted to understand it better. So I don't know if other people did something like that.
We've-
Definitely.
So we've compiled all of the comments and the questions that we got from everybody, and we're going to be, we haven't completed this yet because it's going to take some time, but some of the strategies are going to may need some more research, may need some more input from agencies. We're going to compile all of those and get some responses and shot that back out to everybody, and it will probably be I don't know if we'll have that by our meeting next week, but as soon as we can, we're going to get that out to you all. I've got a couple of slides here. Let me get through a little bit of this. Just a quick reminder about our strategies, and this is more just for the recording and such. I think you all understand our key things to remember about our strategies is that all of them need to be related to land use in some way, so not, agency operations or anything of that nature. The vision that we just adopted, all of our strategies are really going to reinforce that vision for the region. And each vision needs, or each strategy will need to be implementable by the county. And so that is something that as we're wrapping up this plan and coming up with an implementation matrix, we're going to be thinking about what are our metrics for measuring how we are doing on these strategies.
And Patrick, in that implementation conversation? Are you discussing timeline as well?
Yeah, probably, yeah, and in a broad sense of probably short, medium, and long-term
Okay.
timeline, yeah.
Well, I just would say very generally, I'm very concerned about implementable strategies because I read the 2003 small area plan and we're making some of the very same recommendations that they did 20 years ago. So something happened here, these weren't implementable. And so I really hope we can have a discussion on how to word things so that they can be useful, because it's pretty frustrating to me to read these and see that they say the same thing that we're saying and nothing's changed. So how do we write our strategies to be more implementable? And I think maybe that's a separate discussion, just wording.
Okay. Yeah, all of our strategies are going to be a policy guide really for the region. And it'll be each agency that is implementing these. We are committing to having regular implementation reporting to kind of check how we're doing on making progress on all of these. It is not unlikely that in 10 years, all of these are not going to be implemented. I mean, it's likely that some will fall off for one reason or another. And that's why plans are kind of cyclical in nature and they're updated from.
Oh, absolutely. My point was more, if we have the exact same kind of recommendations that were made 20 years ago and it hasn't happened, what happened there? Why?
Okay.
It obviously wasn't written in an implementable fashion. So maybe
Well, there could be other reasons why things weren't implemented as well. Have you taken a look at the implementation report that was done for all of the small area plans? Because there's a little bit more
some of it
information
says
there.
there wasn't enough staffing.
Mhm.
So again, maybe there's a way to write it differently or to ask something.
Right.
Lily's point, there'll be follow-up. I mean, once this goes through the process and, assuming whatever ends up being adopted and incorporated, there'll be a follow-up or the ownership timelines and reporting out and progress and all that.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's the goal.
And also, as we're looking through this body of strategies that we've drafted, we're working to not repeat strategies that are listed in Plan 2040 because those already apply countywide. And so there are some, as we were kind of working through it, we had to keep reminding ourselves that, there's this gap. Well, it's already addressed countywide in Plan 2040, so we didn't want to repeat that. Interestingly, I don't recall seeing a whole lot of comments to that effect in these strategies, but it is something to keep in mind. We're going to try not to really repeat things that are in the Plan 2040 set of strategies. And so if we
if
go to
something
the
says countywide, that isn't comments made to do something countywide. That's not a strategy for Region 7.
no, but I think the way to think about these strategies for our region is the GDP sets the Plan 2040 sets the countywide framework. How do we then implement and drill down at the region level to make that strategy or that goal from Plan 2040 more implementable, more specific for the region? I talked a little bit about strategy last time, but for these strategies, we're hoping to get through this strategy conversation tonight and then next week. So finish those up here in January. And then, as I've mentioned previously, get into the planned land use and zoning discussions from February through April. We do want to have a public review of the strategies that you all approve of in the month of March. So after our meeting next week, we will have a second opportunity where we're going to pull together all of the strategies as we discussed them and any changes and whatnot, and bring them back to you for a final look over before we put them out to the public in March. And then I think the rest of this I talked about last time. May, we're looking at having, after our February through April discussions of land use and zoning, we do want to end that with an SAC endorsed planned land use map and zoning map, and that will go out for a public review in the May timeframe. And then in about June, we will have a review of hopefully the full draft plan, all the text, all the everything for you all to have a look at and endorse before that goes out in July for public review. So just in a nutshell, those are kind of the key upcoming dates that we're looking at. But for tonight, we're really hoping to get consensus on the remaining housing and transportation draft strategies that didn't reach consensus during this survey that we put together. Now, I mentioned next week, we do want to take a look at those land use, healthy communities, and natural environment strategies. And I've sent you all those 3 surveys addressing those. So please do take a look at those this weekend. Don't wait until the last minute to do those. Do make a note to do that this weekend. I'm going to send a couple of email reminders to all of you as well. But we do need your input before Wednesday of next week, please. So make some time this weekend. And now that you've done this, hopefully it doesn't take too terribly long to go through these. So
And have you sent out place for us to actually make comments? So
yeah, those survey. I can resend that tomorrow. Resend those.
For national environment health community.
Yes, it was.
Who's part of the
There was a land use survey, natural resources, natural environment, and then healthy communities and healthy economy was all kind of combined.
Yeah, I have the documents. I'm just trying to remember. I didn't see a place that I could respond to, especially healthy communities and natural environment strategy.
Okay.
That might just be my mistake. So.
I'll resend. It's been a little bit confusing, and I apologize. It's kind of the best that we could do with this weekly cadence of meetings, but I wanted to try to give you all at least a couple of weeks to really spend some time on these strategies. So that's why the email for this next batch came out before this meeting. I will resend that tomorrow. Okay. So yeah.
What day did you send those, Patrick? I don't remember seeing those.
Was it Thursday of last week? I believe.
Yeah, I have the documents. I didn't remember when they click on this server. That's
Should have been linked in that email. I'll make sure.
Oh, I got it.
Well,
I did see one person started the land use survey, so somebody got it.
It was January 12th.
So you got into it. Okay.
I got
You
it.
might have, yeah.
They're just the blue links where it repeats what you are, and just the blue, like the last one.
So go ahead and set it one more time tomorrow.
Yeah, I will. Yep. And again, ideally before Wednesday of next week.
My mistake.
And we could just go over Priscilla's point, if we had some questions, you know, the 4 choices didn't necessarily fit what you wanted to say about particular strategy. So
Each strategy is kind of repeated so that there's an opportunity to vote and then an opportunity to make a comment.
yeah, but no, I know, I understand because I did them, but
Mhm.
still I felt like some of my comments that I was concerned enough about the way the strategy was worded that I didn't necessarily want to agree at the time, but
Sure.
I thought conceptually it was headed in the right direction. So I went all the way down to, so I disagreed and said, stop.
Mhm.
And went down and said, I agree with this, but it.
Yeah.
So I didn't, it doesn't kind of reflect my support of that strategy because it's a
Yeah.
stop. So anyway.
And I remember seeing some of those comments from you, and it was clear. For the purposes of our discussion tonight, though, we did focus in on the ones that would have registered as a stop and mark against that
When
strategy.
you say stop, does that mean no support? Does that mean we need to just talk about it, look at it?
So the ones we're going to focus on tonight, there were 4 that did not meet where 8 people on this committee did not vote to advance the strategy as it was currently worded. Now, virtually all of the other strategies had comments, and we're going to compile all of those and respond to them and get that back out to you all. But tonight, what I want to focus on is the 4 strategies, and they're all housing strategies that did not meet an 8-person threshold of at least 8 people,
But all the
agreeing.
rest are moving forward. They just need to be combined.
We need to go through your comments.
Okay,
And
that's, just didn't want some to come off the table because of the way they were worded.
right now, no, right now,
Okay.
none are off the table, except potentially the 4 that I want us to talk about
House.
tonight.
Okay.
And I don't actually anticipate that all of you want those 4 to come off. I suspect what we'll do is tweak them tonight. And then our goal, I think, is to see if we can reach consensus on those 4 and on some language that we would be comfortable with putting out to the public. And again, I'll say this again. Once we finish this process, we'll have a list of strategies that it's just wording that's going to go to the public. I mean, this is not the final wording that's going to go to council by any stretch of the imagination. But I want our best effort as a group on how these should be worded. And so this is tonight we'll focus in on these 4 that didn't reach that.
This is also going to focus if we want to do additional research or bring in maps or diagrams or something. I mean, this is focusing our efforts too. We're going to stay within this strategy listing for now on these areas. We're not going to look at anything beyond the strategies that we've proposed.
I'm not sure I understand what you're.
I mean, there are some where we're talking about doing, say, a partnership, and I would like to do a little research on other municipalities that have those partnerships so that we can use clearer language when we're proposing the strategy. But I'm saying we're really going to focus on any kind of additional work to be within the strategies that we come up with. We have our universe of strategies, not coming up with anything after this.
Potentially, I mean, there were some the last question in all of these strategies was, are there any, that are missing or,
Right.
that need, and we've got a couple of comments or a couple that maybe need to be considered there as well. So,
Okay.
but we're not there yet in terms of us combing through. We've had today to
Okay,
try to
all right, I understand.
process
So
this.
there might be new ones that you proposed, but you're not ready to share those.
We've had today to
Yeah.
try to process this. And so where we're at now is we have 4 that we need to discuss tonight because we didn't reach an 8-person, quorum threshold of approval for those. And so what I'd like to do is move forward with looking at those 4. And again, they're all housing related. The transportation ones all had at least 8 people vote to advance those.
So Patrick, just so that I'm clear, it sounds like there may be components of this that we have a one-on-one in terms of agreeing to the strategy, but there's also a little bit of concern about even those from some of the members. So I'm just trying to understand how do we find out about those and see if they our thoughts on this.
So
Show up in the next round of us looking at these things.
So what we're doing is we're putting together a spreadsheet of all of the comments that we've gotten on these. And we need to come through all of those and provide some responses to questions if there was clarification needed. Some of them we may need to talk to agencies to get some more information or some more research. We're going to try to go through all of that and provide that to everyone.
Okay. So that will be the way that we'll get the information that you're seeing that we're not stating. Say these are the concerns that were raised beyond what we're going to talk about tonight.
And so that would also include, going back to your example of transportation, where we had consensus or at least on those. We'll still have some additional discussion about that. See people's comments about that, or we're done with the transportation aspect.
I think we need to decide as a group how to move forward. If we're going to talk as a group about every strategy, we're going to need some more meetings probably to do that. I think what I would suggest probably is let's compile these comments all together, some responses from either ourselves or agencies or whatever kind of, response to the questions that you all had input, and take a look at it from there, and then see if, what we as a group need to do to move forward with these. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I thought a lot of the transportation strategies were things that we had all talked about before and all were in agreement about it. Everybody brought them up and thought we needed to do them. So probably most of them won't need a whole lot of discussion. But I guess you're just saying maybe we can just kind of go through them and say, yeah, got it.
No, I know. I was just asking procedurally, are we done with transportation? What is the next phase of transportation since we seem to have consensus?
Yeah, I think you all need to see all of the comments.
Yeah, okay.
And any potential responses.
And would you send that to our transportation work group? I mean, that might be something work groups could help with too.
Yeah, I mean, if we need
could
to
look at them
reconvene,
and we
though.
could- I think that was very helpful in getting some of these ready to go.
It was,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We could certainly continue to help that way.
One thing that I obsessed over was that I would read them and I would say, oh yeah, that makes sense. But wait a minute, what about when this happened and that happened? How's this actually going to be implemented? And is it going to still allow that event to happen? That it's something that we're dealing with maybe that was I'm having trouble even explaining. So for instance, it was a policy that, or excuse me, a strategy that said recommend to. One thing that comes to mind was in housing with the what was it, affordable range and what the median income was. And median income in 2022 for Arundel County was 64 to 150,000. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, this is a big range. And how are you going to address that in this strategy? So I overthought it. And so that I struggled with someone because I overthought, or I knew of an example of something else where a similar strategy was being implemented and it failed or ended up being not what I think the intent was because of an opportunity. Like when you're talking about partnerships, we don't have control over who those partners are. And so then I would obsess about that. And so that I would be very reluctant to approve. So anyway, I'm just trying to say, I probably was not as proactive in supporting some of those as I would have been if I wouldn't have overthought it, or had instances where I could see where that could go back.
I think I'm sorry.
I was going to say, it seems to me like got a couple of those instances, but all of them. So if you're going to compile a list of where there was a concern voiced or an exception taken to the statement strategy, then we'll see that and then we can talk about those and decide together whether that's worth the discussion or smaller groups or whatever.
And my comments may not be coherent about it because, but I'll try.
I mean, they're written out, so we'll make the best. Yeah, let's see where we're landing with this. it's hard to talk in the blind about what the
Exactly.
problem
I
is.
can't even remember what the examples were.
There's a lot of
Nothing else.
questions, so
There's a lot. Did you want to say
Yeah,
something?
I just want to make one comment about implementation strategies and getting. So you all are going to send recommendations which get formulated into the plan. Most every strategy that's going to be in these plans will require further approval, either by the county council through legislation or through budget appropriations, which again goes to the county council. So all of these things still require into the future public engagement and public involvement. And I'm hearing a lot of passion in the room, and I would encourage you to follow these as they go. But this, and like Lily is saying, recommendations from the 03 plan didn't get implemented. Why didn't they get implemented? Weren't these watchdogs necessarily following them? Or in some cases, the county council may have decided we didn't have the appetite to deal with it. So I do think, don't get too hung up right now, because there is still a lot of road ahead and a lot of opportunity for public involvement. This stuff doesn't happen, you know, behind a curtain. It's out there in the public realm and ripe for plenty of engagement.
I think, not to speak for Lily, but I think what I'm hearing is that we want to make sure whatever we proffer has been crafted carefully enough that there's, you know, as much consensus as we can build in this room for the board. So people pick that up in the next one.
Yeah, definitely.
Does that make sense?
Sure. I think I will serve as a historian and just remind everyone what 2003 small area planning group wanted to see, and maybe we can think about it. You know, I understand there's going to be a lot more hearings, but I also think there is value in the way we craft some of the things that we bring forward, because, you know, I understand what you're saying, but sometimes when they're too nebulous, citizens groups don't even understand what the point is of it, or so from a community standpoint.
And I think kind of tagging on to your point, I think there's a lot of institutional knowledge here in terms of like what hasn't. I think it's really key that we identify what the problem, like what some of the problems are, you know, and that we'd be really like, that's where we really need, I think, clarity. I think sometimes we can get hung up on trying to apply a specific tool to address that problem. And sometimes there are a lot of things in the toolbox. So I think that's another kind of key thing to think about as we go through these strategies. There may be some where we can identify a particular tool. Now we know that that is what we need, but I think there are a lot where it's maybe more important to identify the issue and make sure that that's very clear. So anyway, for what that's worth, why don't we dive into these? Okay, we got one more.
No, I don't want you to get too hung up on the 2003 strategies. One of the lessons learned from that process was to make sure that what we, or not, we collectively are recommending is implemented.
Exactly.
And
That's
so
my
that's
point.
what, and that's sort of our job, going back to projects, county departments that will be implementing them themselves and making sure that and that, I don't think that level of was put into.
I mean, no, I'm not making any criticism of anything that the county was doing at the time. I'm just saying these seem to be relevant now to what happened and how can we word it differently, or specific, and maybe tools in the box. Maybe that's what we do. We just understand what the tools are. So I hear what you're saying.
I feel like we've chased this down as far as we need to tonight. So I think everyone's point is pretty clear. I just want to circle back on that.
Yes,
Make sure we
definitely.
outline.
Because we're all spending a lot of time looking at this.
Sure, sure. We want to make sure we're not missing it. Taking the time to look at it. So with that, let's go into the housing ones. Showed up as our primary discussion. So let's get into
Perfect mouse,
Just click on the mouse, maybe.
or just click on the,
No, just click on the
on
screen.
the screen, sorry.
Yes, there you go.
All right,
Okay.
there we go. I got it. I just went
Good.
too far.
Okay, so before we jump into the strategies, there were some questions just about terms and understanding what some of these terms meant. And I know that we kind of use these terms, you know, and expect you guys to know what we're talking about. So just before we jump into the strategies, we'll just go over some of these key terms. The first being affordable housing. So this is not currently defined in our code explicitly, but state and federal policies say that to be considered affordable, housing costs should not exceed 30% of household income. So this can refer to like naturally occurring, a criteria that meets that, you know, naturally, or a criteria that is income restricted to achieve that goal. So usually when we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about that income restricted, you know, it's actually, you have you know, it's explicitly required or it's specifically proffered as part of that development to offer units that meet that 30% of the household income criteria. So workforce housing is defined in our code, and it's this is kind of generally it's simplified a little bit, but it's deed and income restricted dwelling units that are affordable to households earning 60 to 100% of the area median income. And then
Area, county, or region?
counts. Yes.
And what's the time frame of the definition of income? Is it
Usually most current.
I can only find
Yeah.
2020, but I didn't really delve into it.
I think the
I just-
income limits are updated annually.
Yeah.
How do things like simply in April?
So for the county, it's around 100,000 is the median. It's like 90.
And is it, will there be an asterisk because of COVID for those 2 years?
I don't know. Good question. Yeah, so but it does change year by year. So missing middle. So this graphic kind of depicts what we're talking about with missing middle. It's not currently defined in our code, but it describes a range of housing types in between a single family house and a large apartment complex. So it's those duplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, kind of anything in that range that almost takes up the size of a single family house, but has multiple units in it.
So clearly, it's very important to have a definition in the county code for missing middle, because it's in every single strategy that was recommended. And I haven't gone to one presentation that didn't talk about it as if everybody knew what they were talking about. So it's very critical. That's going to be really hard for some neighborhoods to swallow.
Agreed, yeah. Okay, so moderately priced dwelling unit program. So this refers to the adoption of a program, which our county does not currently have, but it's a program that would require private developers to provide a certain number of affordable units within a development over a certain size. So say 10 units. An MPDU program would be a county-run program that would assist households that fit the criteria of are within that moderate income. So this could be, it's a certain level for rental units and it's typically a certain level for purchasing a house. But it's a program that some other jurisdictions have. Arundel does not have an MPDU program yet. Although we did have a work group working on a policy that it was paused back before Plan 2040 was adopted.
Does the city have one?
The city does, yes.
Have we seen a copy of it?
I don't know if
think
we
so.
sent it out, but we did talk about it briefly. Housing living.
No, I know, but the city has a program, but it doesn't get enforced It routinely, there's congregate care, there's a lot of ways that developers don't have to apply that. I just went through a presentation about that. So I think there's a group that would like to see that program tightened up a bit so that there is more moderately priced dwelling units associated with developments. And I think it would be good to kind of see what the city has, because I'm sure the county will adopt something more similar to that as well. Obviously, so to hear the concerns about how that's getting.
Lessons learned, right?
Yeah, lessons.
We're looking at Christina because she was on the work group initially. So when we get into this policy that we're going to discuss about MPDO, maybe Christina can comment, but okay. APFO. So this adequate public facilities ordinance and specifically surrounding schools. So the idea is that, development, any project that comes in must test for school capacity. And so council adopts a school utilization chart every year that determines which schools are at capacity and which are not. And so essentially what that does is it closes down a feeder district. So for example, in our region, Annapolis High School is closed, meaning that anywhere in that feeder district, they're going to, any new development is going to be on a wait list for up to 6 years until Annapolis High School now has capacity. But there are exceptions to that. So anything in the town center, for example, is exempt to that. Age restricted development with criteria. With criteria.
Yeah.
And age restricted housing, commercial, industrial, things that aren't producing, uses that aren't producing students. There's criteria that are exempt for that, but that's the general idea behind.
That's right. In that school presentation, wasn't there I thought they had changed the way they were reporting those numbers, not specific to the district, but the county overall. Didn't we get the numbers back as
We were told there was going to be
Yeah.
a change, yeah.
Yeah, they haven't done it yet. They came up with that plan. My
So
question is, when are they gonna?
there's
present
a work group that was working on it. It's been paused because of the new director coming on. But as soon as she comes on board, they are reconvening that work group, and we've been told there's
We assume they were gonna be,
okay.
is there an interim? I think, don't we reference that?
We do.
We have a presentation.
Right, but
Having built under that, I'm pretty proud of it. Germany from the school.
Right.
But at the end of 6 years, if the capacity is not there, aren't they allowed to continue?
They are. Yeah, so it's the 6 years, and then if there's
You don't-
still not
you don't live
capacity.
that long.
Yeah.
and then the school's still full, and then they build a development.
Yeah, if it's 6 years. So.
That means that they've given the jurisdiction 6 years to solve the problem of providing adequate public facilities. with
Right.
Respect to school
To increase.
capacity.
But if they don't solve the problem,
Or don't have the right to do so, or
Well, you just think about it, I mean, I know there's an exemption with criteria around it, but we're talking about the majority of development of the building control area, which is an area. And so,
Just another exemption though too is like subdivisions less than 5 lots, for example, are not subject to APF. So there are some exceptions to that, but on the large scale, it does really affect, what we can build in this region.
I do want to be clear too, it's not all development that goes into parole is automatically exempt from school testing. There are criteria related to one, and I can't remember if 2-bedroom apartments are exempt. But there are criteria of that nature that.
I understand.
You want me to read it? I got it right.
Do you? Okay, sure.
Okay, so exemptions within Pearl Town Center Growth Management Area, residential development in the Pearl Town Center Growth Management Area, subject to an approved incentive program, is exempt from the adequate schools facilities test if the following conditions are met. 1, project provides structured parking. 2, the project is a mixed-use development that includes residential, commercial, or industrial uses that are integrated in pedestrian access. 3, the residential portion of the mixed-use project consists of multifamily dwellings with no less than 50% of the dwelling units consisting of efficiency or one-bedroom units, because generally they don't generate school-age children, and no dwelling units with more than 2 bedrooms. So you can't have like 3-bedroom apartments get exempted in Pearl. And those are, you know, an apartment of that size is probably going to be generating school-age children. And
So
then,
how does that work? Families.
well, the exemption is really about providing units that don't end up
Don't generate-
providing housing for workforce housing.
Yeah, you're fighting yourself.
Defeats the main purpose.
Right.
Well, I don't know that, I mean, I
Not-
think
not entirely.
3-bedroom, we're moving into
Right.
families. And I think they're just trying to find that line so that.
But if you have a working family, with 3 kids, and you're limited to a 2-bedroom apartment,
Well,
we're
workforce
still
housing
bringing in
doesn't,
3 kids, but
workforce housing doesn't, it's not mutually exclusive, but it doesn't mean that it includes a family. Workforce is people.
It's not, that's what.
It's 2 different things, really. So that area doesn't address families, but it could address workforce housing.
That's fair. I mean, they're not screened necessarily, but
There's overlap for sure.
but the fact of the matter is you're sitting here saying you want to, as part of smart growth, have the majority of the growth that occurs residentially in an area that already has capacity constraints. So the question really becomes, in addition to what the private sector is doing, what is the county doing in its capital plans to help provide that capacity?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason there was restriction on development with overcrowding and at this high school. So how can that get solved?
Right, yeah.
I mean, that's a need. Something has to change and.
Well, school capacity has to be increased.
Right, so I
Right.
guess we don't have anything to say about that.
So
And or the correct accounting.
So we've also built 2 high schools for, so Crofton High and the high school going up to Severna Park. So I think the county is, yes, I think the county is trying to address this right now within that hopefully within that 6-year time frame.
Crofton is
Yeah, they-
already at capacity.
It is,
yeah. I mean, it doesn't touch it.
But I think, I mean, there can be strategies in the region plans that address school capacity in
There
areas
is one.
where growth is projected or targeted. And because certainly we have those recommendations in Plan 23.
What do you mean? Like what could a Region 7 strategy do?
Ensure that, I mean,
We have a, we have a draft strategy,
In school plan?
for, yeah, specific to Annapolis High School.
talks about potential for redistricting, or is that what,
Mhm,
and also moving programs to other schools or.
to ensure adequate capacity for, to meet housing needs.
Right.
Is that
Desiree,
in your
let's
housing?
move on through this because we've got
Let's
a lot
do
of
it,
ground to
yeah.
cover. Essentially, what you're doing is trying to provide background on the questions
Yes.
that came up from.
Exactly,
Questionnaire.
so hopefully that provides a little bit of background as to some of these, there were questions about some of these strategies.
So when we make our strategies, are we gonna define these terms and then one of our recommendations would be that these are clearly defined?
Yes, we have, so we have already started a glossary for
Okay.
the terms for the region plan, so this will be very clearly defined in the plan. So, okay, so the first strategy that did not meet quorum, you can see there were 4 people that said need more discussion. 7 people who liked it or could live with it, but the strategy as it's written is continue to explore and define a possible NPDU policy and draft recommendations and code revisions to implement Plan 2040 goals related to NPUs, including development incentives, leasing and purchase structures, exemptions for qualified developments. So these were some of the comments. We talked about how the city does have an NPDU policy, the county does not. So that's kind of gets to that question. Some people just wanting to understand more what potential incentives are. And then some general comments about, you know, what could improve affordable housing. So how do we feel? I mean, based on our discussion so far about NPDUs, are there specific people who wanted to stop on this? Are there specific parts of this we're not okay with? Or does anyone want to pipe up?
If the goal is to have a strategy that we can all coalesce around, how do we get there with this one? Or does it get stricken altogether?
This one did not thrill me. And some of it I really like the part about, you know, having multifamily houses and so on. But I really don't understand the whole incentive and relief from permits and processing and connection fees. I mean, if you give a whole development relief from those fees, where does that go? You know, who's now supplementing that? Is that other home purchasers or developers that are picking that up? I mean, these costs don't just go into oblivion, they go somewhere.
So if I can build development that is at market rate has and make the economics work. Isn't rental or sale housing. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to set aside certain units for somebody who's at 30% of their income or 60, 80 or 100%. I'm going to max out what I can do. If you're telling me as a policy that's important and I need to provide a percentage of those, hit those targets, 30, 60%, whatever it might be. But I'm saying, fine, what I'd like to do is to have my economics on the moderately priced portion be neutral, so I'm not penalizing. And so, and so that's the part where, you know, if I'm going to go forward and have to go through additional effort to create, you know, those units, I want to be able to be held neutral if I was just doing all market rate.
So I understand that, but I'm saying if you still would incur those fees, you know, the connection fees and permits. So what would you do? Pass them?
So essentially what happens is having been a while since I've done it. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm just allocating those costs over my market rate. So that the affordable units that come to market are less burdened by those kind of costs. I don't know if I'm explaining that.
No, I mean, you might be explaining it well, I'm not understanding it, because, so say there's connection fees. Let's just stick with one thing, connection fees. Okay. So if those are waived for your, what do we call it, MPDUs, does that mean that the city or the county wouldn't receive those connection fees for those units, or does that mean that you would have to put those costs into your other units?
Yeah,
so that
generally those fees are only waived on the portion of the affordable, not for,
right.
not for all.
But if you're doing
Yes,
units,
you're absorbing those costs because what's happening is
you being the developer or me being the taxpayer?
You being
The way, look, what we're trying to do is provide incentives for the developers to include moderately priced and affordable developments into their projects. And the problem the developer has is that it costs the same amount to put provide a unit that I can sell for 200 versus 600. Right, so how do I incentivize that developer to do? One way jurisdictions have done it is to say, if you can provide those units, we will waive the fee for the connection, which is $200 for the water sewer.
And that's how I'm reading.
And that's how I understand it's working. Now, I know there's other ways, but that's how.
So then my question is on your, so if it's $200 per unit and you're getting, that's waived on you, who's picking up that cost?
The
Is it-
jurisdiction and the taxpayer.
Yeah, the taxpayers. So
Sure, because you're providing a need that is not driven by market conditions. In other words, I have no incentive to provide that just because I'm going to lose money doing so. So what's the benefit to me to doing it?
Because I'm not using the ability to build my original market rate units at $600,000, because I'm getting a sufficient economic bonus that I can essentially theoretically be neutral.
Right. But I
And so
think,
my concern as a middle income person is, okay, so now that's being, you take that 30 to the lower income, and now what you're doing is essentially increasing my tax base because you're passing that cost on to the middle income and the upper income. Now, maybe the upper income can afford it. I don't know that I can. So I just don't think it's a great solution.
and it may not be, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think if you look at the model that the city of Annapolis, if you want to do 100 unit development, you're required to do 10 of your selling. They don't care about it. And if it's for rent, I think it's a higher number, it's 12%. And those are deeded that way in perpetuity, so it's not something they don't time out. 10 years of use to rent that unit. It's going to still have to meet those criteria until the law changes. So there's two tools. One is to try and provide an incentive to the builder, and the other is to mandate provide the units as part of the development. I think they're just both tools to try and get the units.
And frankly, you know, want to talk about long-term, I mean, an implementation. You know, I try all the time to pass stronger bills, you know, to you know, conserve forests and things like that. And unless there's incentives for developers, and a lot of them, they're not politically feasible, to be frank. I mean, so if we want to talk about long-term, you know, touch points on certain strategies and stuff, sometimes you have to throw a bone to people who, you know, to get to what we need. I mean, so I'm not necessarily opposed to incentives because in my experience, sometimes it's the only way to get good legislation passed or good recommendations through the process. I know that's a little cynical, but
And I would agree. I mean, what struck at least a nerve for me was the relief from the APFs, and that's right. So this is a strategy, and we're trying to plan ahead for the future. And like, not to go back to the school, the education, but like the schools, right? The whole point is to plan ahead and give the kids a better opportunity, right, and better conditions. But we're allowing an opportunity to bypass it. We're always gonna be reactive on that.
That's kind of how I thought about that
Right.
too. Well, and in a general sense, what is the strategy? This is just so.
And understanding this is just one small piece, right? Like, it obviously needs collaboration from that, right? Like,
Right.
but if this is what's holding them to task, right? Like, hey, Anne Arundel County, we need to get our act together to, right, regardless of administration or political, you know, terms or cycles or however it's working. Hey, if we want to keep development moving, let's figure out the school seat situation, get out of these temporaries, and right. It holds them.
I hear the bone thing, but, you know, we're spending a lot of time thinking of bones
We're going to be
throwing
reactive.
out to the developers, but can't we go back and say, well, we have a problem here?
We're just
else
going to be
can
reactive, like this
push to
region will
fix
just be reactive to every problem. Oh, the school too full. Eventually, like their ambulance service will be right. It'll just be too busy. We didn't plan for enough EMS service. You know, right? That's
Well, think about it
We
this
have
way too.
childcare problems.
Think about it this way too. Again, we were just kind of, Christina read us like what the criteria. 1-bedroom units do not generate children. There's a few maybe, but when we talk about moving the needle for school capacity, 1 and 2 bedrooms, if you go through all of the studies that show how people use these units, they generate a very, very low number of.
one, I would argue, right? Like the Forest Drive corridor, that's what we thought with the Tyler Heights Elementary School. We did wrong there, right? But just based on the population that's living on Drive Forward, that might be the traditional what some people think, but not in all, that is not I can't, I wouldn't define a
I don't disagree, but I think we just go back to what we're reading here. What this is asking is to continue and explore and define possible MPDU policy and draft recommendations. So what we're saying is, hey, you don't have one. The county doesn't have one. What we're asking you to do is to look at one. We'll give you some guidance about what that might include. Some of the things include, incentives. That's one possibility. But the primary issue is let's get a plan in place that includes something. Now, I personally, I bristle at not dealing with school capacity for some units. Because I'm like, well, that's a responsibility of government to provide that, the seats, right? We want to have growth and we need to provide the seats. Are we providing them in the right place? That's part of understanding the strategy. Like, what does that look like? I'm all for trying to make, entice a developer to work to provide those units and help them to do that. It's not an adversarial thing. It's like, let's figure out how to make that work so that you don't, the project shouldn't come to a halt because of the problem that's being imposed by the jurisdiction. It shouldn't. It should be market. So all this is saying is they should have something. And these are some things that could be included. So I share the concerns, but I think it's an important strategy to have. Because absent it, we're not talking towards MPPU, which, I just don't, I think it's just not right. We should have that stuff, if that's what we did at this point.
Yeah, but I'd like to be a little more creative too. We're just looking at ways to give developers break. Those are
That's
all.
one of the
Well,
strategies.
not necessarily.
So
yeah.
what other things could be going on in this moderate price too? I mean, I'm just saying, let's also think of some other. We have this list.
Or leave that list out of it.
Right, I was gonna say, is it because, an MPDU policy is actually, a developer probably doesn't want it. Policy. To some extent, they're, I mean, so they're like, we don't want to.
We're happy it's not there.
Right, so it's really more for
That's great.
the pub, for the people who need the affordable units that this is benefiting. So is it the list here that we're struggling with? Because I think the intent of this strategy really is to move the MPDU policy forward and saying, we want to support an MPDU policy. We want the county to work on this. And so if it's just the kind of the last part of it that we're struggling with, then we can get rid of that part and we can just say.
Important, but I think we should think about
So-
other things to go.
So what if we cut it off, like put a period where the comma is here and then introduce that list, something like evaluate the opportunity and impact of things including.
I like that.
Something
I like
along those
that.
lines.
Let's say that one.
Evaluating the opportunity and impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that because it speaks to maybe the pros and the cons of.
I think it speaks to any kind of housing policy. We're kind of getting into the housing market and messing with that, which is kind of,
You are. getting
there
into
are
it.
impacts.
You are.
And
Yeah.
it's a little bit. Yeah, that needs to be done very carefully. It can't be too.
Well, Patrick, I agree, but I think that the starting point is we agree that MPUs are an important component of what we'd like to see happen. That's kind of a stop. So that's one sentence, right? And that's what the first part says. And we want to have further discussion about what our recommendations beyond that are in terms of the methodologies. I think that's a valid concern. I would support that. I'd also say keep in mind that what you're trying to do is get to the outcome that is dealing with these things. So the jurisdiction has a responsibility too. This is not new news that was put in the past. What is the jurisdiction doing to solve that problem? And how are we helping them to do that? There's another piece of the housing that says we want to make sure that we're charging fees for these developments that are targeted to solve these problems somewhere else. So those are kind of strategies that we should be looking at. Is the money specifically targeted to regional developments, or does it just go to the school board and they put them in places where they want to?
So Leah's talking about something, some of these looked like they would be better to be combined strategies. Is that something we're gonna look at some point?
We could, but let's focus on getting this one.
No, I know, but I'm just
first.
asking.
Here's that. say we stay on task.
Well, I mean, to your point,
Maybe we can-
I think there's more things like, are these fees going to the targeted school? If we had our list that was just a clear idea of all realm of strategies that we're thinking about. I mean, this could have said that strategy on take one. And
So I think it would be
years,
evaluate the
it has
potential
a
for
more
an impact
robust
of
strategy.
The impact of.
the potential for an impact of
I really don't
Tools
feel
like-
like having some of those ideas in there. Let them come up with, whoever's gonna work on this at that next point. There's such a
Okay.
burden in this set. I mean, I'm sitting here just feeling the burden for the, fixed income senior community and the 55+ communities. That now we're gonna pick up all this burden.
Is there any quantitative studies at the county? Is there a value to having MBDUs? Is that worth anything?
It's
I mean-
another tool in the toolbox for addressing housing shortage and more affordable units.
But, I can see the concern from suicide, it's like, what's in it per minute, right? That's from the fixed income seniors. Is there any study that say there's a value to the community for offering? That we could balance out the concern?
I think there was, I mean, one of the presentations we saw was that, there's a synergy in certain communities where older and younger people are in the same place. And so the reason I think it's important is because what happens in many cases is things are segregated socioeconomically. Because people want to build, I'll build you 36 MPDUs in one spot. The roadside's littered with failures of low-income housing. It's concentrated in the single areas. So adding these into these developments, I think is critically important in changing how people look and feel when this is happening. So I think it's like super important.
There's also a lot of literature about the problem with bringing in a small percentage of lower income people into higher income households or neighborhoods. I mean, it becomes a stigma. It's like, oh, you're the poor family, and there's a lot of stuff about that that's not very positive. I'm much more supportive of the missing middle housing, which is to take developments and make a combination of quadplexes, triplexes, and all that, where you have a community that can bring in a variety of different incomes, but it's the community itself is based on that. It's not putting some low-income people into a high-income community.
Well, okay.
I think so. Again, my experience is a little bit because I haven't got last year. But when I have built moderately priced units and I built them actually for selling $800,000 and $900,000, I never had a problem. Whereas Leo said, I built them segregated. That turns out to be a stick.
That's, I'm not saying it can't be a problem in that scenario, because I
No,
think it can be, but I think when you're talking about developments that go to these numbers, specifically, mixed use or the missing middle developments, percentages that cross those social borders, including the unit, I think changes.
I think one thing that we may be missing is that we're not, the people who are currently existing in established housing, we're not the only ones picking this up. Once these folks move into these homes, they're going to be contributing, they're going to be paying taxes. So, these are just societal demands that keep the economy going and keep making a better, healthier community. So if you have to forego some of the fees to begin with, those folks are going to be contributing and be paying taxes. And so, I don't know, I'm not as concerned, and I'm retired too, but so I'm less concerned about who's paying for what, as I am making sure that we have the opportunity for them to have this housing and be contributing.
The housing is very important to me. I mean, I really, really believe that huge gap. I'm just concerned about using some of this language. Say, if we say to them, we need a policy on MPDUs, I'm just uncomfortable giving them options to consider at this point, because it sounds like we're swaying them in a certain direction.
You would like, so in this highlighted sentence that, that Desiree gave us, you would like to delete, evaluate the potential for all of that.
That's all I,
Just keep the first.
I mean, obviously, the rest of the group is not on that.
Well, I think if that's
That's
like
true.
a
That's true.
consensus, maybe, it's worth just deleting it, right? Because we need to move forward. I mean,
Okay,
So can
let's
you
not
take
let-
some to work on and come back with? Or want to offer something? I mean, I don't know what your process is, but if you want everybody to agree tonight, you're gonna get one thing. If you let 2 or 3 people go back and come up with some wording to the next meeting, you might get more consensus. If you have a 2-part process as opposed to how's everyone vote tonight? I don't know how you guys want to do this, but
Do we want to vote on consensus for this as it's written now? And then if we say no, then we can either strike it out and vote on that or change it in some other way?
Sure, we can go through that process.
okay, so motion for,
is this consensus or motion?
That's a good point. I guess
Two
we
different
did
things.
say consensus, yeah. So I guess,
Very
But
different.
does that have to be unanimous? Do we need 100% to do
it's
it?
just 8.
Consensus is 100% now. Parliamentary
so
procedure.
it seems
is
like we
51%.
don't have 100% consensus. So should we?
But you could vote on.
It's not 100%. You have it up there on your.
The continuum.
on your earlier slide.
60%.
So
I'm saying. Have to study more, or we don't have it go forward. That's.
Yeah.
I just think we shouldn't get lost in the fact that we all agree that the first part is absolutely necessary. Right?
Yeah.
So,
To explore it.
yeah, so why don't, like,
So
I think-
just strike the second.
yeah.
sentence.
What does the second sentence add in terms of Lily's point 45 minutes ago in terms of development? Is it enhance it? Is it water it down?
I feel like the work of a group is going to educate themselves in all of these things. They're going to know all of those tools and more than we do, and they're going to be better versed to come up with a
I agree. I mean,
program that really works.
What I would propose for the second sentence is evaluate the potential and impact of various options,
Okay,
because they already know options. That would be my proposal.
evaluate the impact and
Potential and
potential
impact, just like
potential and impact of various options.
period.
How do we feel?
I'm fine with that.
is there a motion on this one? Should we do it that way?
Yeah, are we doing consensus or are we doing?
Well, consensus, I mean,
You don't need a motion.
everyone okay with this?
Can we get a show of thumbs up or hands or whatever? Okay, that is consensus. All
So
right.
we've got, it's 7:20 now, we've got 3 more to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so just want to make sure we're.
it takes a while to work through kind of understand what
Yeah,
the process.
But we had
is.
such a limited, I don't want more meetings added to the calendar. Like, that's-
No, I
that's
understand.
I know, but if you have to, I mean, I spent a lot of time trying to look through all these and do research. And so I'm sorry, trying to understand the process.
And I,
So that I am more efficient with a little bit of time I have to give to this effort.
and I
So
apologize,
I can vote on all of this if that's how you.
I apologize, that was not my intent.
It's not gonna work.
I just think we respect some of this process information.
I will take the time it takes to get to what we have to.
I mean, there's a reason we don't have a kind of policy. This is messy.
Yeah, exactly.
And messy gets messy.
No, I agree, and I'm sorry if it came across as dismissive of everyone's concerns, I think they're very valid. I guess my concern is. I agree. I just, my concern is that if we're not moving forward, this could easily, we can easily have a meeting every single night of the week. for
We
the
spend 2
entire-
hours on this.
Right, exactly, so
Report.
let's move forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's the right.
Okay.
I'm glad we made it through this first one. I think
Yeah, me too.
The adjustments are what we want.
I agree.
It's great.
Okay, so next strategy was about more flexibility for workforce and affordable housing in terms of the forest conservation requirement to allow more affordable housing to be built essentially. So this strategy came out of conversations with Arundel Community Development Services and just kind of stating that, you know, affordable housing projects are often hard to make pencil out, hard to make profitable. And so oftentimes they're working with smaller parcels or other requirements, you know, dealing such as forest conservation requirements. So this is kind of a, you know, we want both, but, you know, are we willing to give on one to get the other? And so that's, I think we had 4 with stop hold. So, I mean, the comments were, I think, very similar in nature that we don't want to give up on our forest conservation requirements in order to allow for more affordable housing. So
Yeah, my concern was the term flexible, right? Like, so how are we defining flexible? Does that mean less trees need to be replanted if they're cut down? Does that mean we're allowing more mature contiguous forests to be lost? I'm okay with making it as flexible as possible as long as we're reaching a 1-to-1 ratio for every tree that's cut down. So if you guys can define flexible a little bit more clearly, that's fine, but just want to make it abundantly clear that I don't support any strategy that would result in a net loss of forest in Anne Arundel County.
Requirements are not one.
yeah, they're not.
I understand, but on a state level, you know, we're actively working to get to a 1-to-1, and in fact, on a net gain. So, you know, I think that's the goal of the state. And I think, you know, in Anne Arundel County, they've passed stronger forest conservation laws in the last few years as well. So why can't we be aspirational?
So I'm going to cut to the chase with this because I do dispense with it pretty quickly. This is trying to link the potential for additional growth to some relief on what the forest conservation laws are doing. That's really pretty specific in my mind. And you know, if you really want to be smart for people, redevelopment is a pretty big deal right now. Like there are areas available to do higher density housing and address these things that don't go into the forest. I personally think the forest conservation is a little heavy. Like every shopping center that's failing and every other component. So I guess we could talk about this for a couple hours, but my guess is that you're not going to get any consensus that says you're going to compromise forest conservation for any set. That's I just think that's what we're doing.
I will not support this at all, because the reality is that it takes 50 to 100 years for a tree to be productive. And so you can plant all the little seedlings you want, but number one, most of them don't survive. And number two, you have to wait 50 to 100 years for them to start.
They'll sink carbon.
I have some very good research on that. It says, But anyway, I'm just gonna say I'm not supporting.
So, I mean,
Motion that we take this one off.
that we strike this.
Strike.
altogether.
That your motion.
Well, I'm disappointed by it, to be honest with you, but I think it's where we're gonna land. And I'll tell you why I'm disappointed, because, you know, this is an urban environment. This is not campus. This is a place where people want to work and live and play. And there's real benefit to consolidating where growth happens, and Arundel County is one of those places. But I understand clearly that I'm in.
I mean, the result of this, Leo, let's all be realistic for employers here. Great, don't let my employees live in that. Don't let them burn. Have them drive more miles and cause more pollution. Is that really what we want? This just makes absolute sense.
I think relief on forest conservation is probably something I would be interested in, but I don't think we couple with just that.
Yeah, and to be clear, I agree with your point. I just think that there's other ways to encourage development without sacrificing forests. I mean, increasing density, all the strategies we talked about, if they're all implemented, then, you know, we shouldn't have to sacrifice forests, right?
I think it's two separate things. I agree with you. So that's where I think we're headed. Talk for 2 hours.
Yeah, so we can conflict.
Well, I think Kate made a motion to strike this strategy altogether.
Well, is there consensus on striking?
Yeah, that's a good, yeah.
Do we have consensus?
I mean, so am I doing that in a way that you're not comfortable with?
No, it's just so funny because we keep missing parliamentary procedure. With
So why don't you
consensus.
share with us?
So with consensus, somebody makes a proposal and you discuss it and then you test for consensus. And if everybody supports it, then that's right. Parliamentary procedure, you make a motion and you second the motion and you discuss it and then you vote on it. It's just that they're two completely different processes. And I think that our bylaws said that we were going to use consensus. But if we couldn't reach consensus, then at some point we would use parliamentary procedure. We had a lot of discussion. That's right. We had a lot of discussion about that. And so just to make it really easy, their proposal would be that somebody proposes that we go ahead and use it as worded, or they might say, I propose that we, support this sentence with this change, with this in it or something. And then you discuss it and then you test.
But this one is, we're talking about this one because people did not vote for it. So to cut to the chase, we would discuss dropping this strategy.
Which is the
So the
discussion.
proposal would be that we not support this strategy. And then you say, okay, let's test for consensus, and people would say, yeah, let's not support this strategy. And if somebody does want to support it, then they put their thumb down. And then you have more discussion, or they come up with an alternate proposal.
Well, thanks for clarifying. So I appreciate the help.
Nor mine, actually.
So I know it should be as a chair, but in any case, I'll do the best I can. And I would say that the discussion is about whether or not we have consensus on moving it in its entirety. Let's have that discussion.
Show of hands.
What's the magnitude? Do we have a sense in the county of how many potential parcels in the region that could be improved, that would be impacted, like the mall, right? Would adding affordable housing to the mall be impacted by forest conservation plans?
Because all the trees are nothing.
So then, but do we have it exactly? But
That's
that's
to Anna's
one
point.
way.
We're
To
looking
comply
at.
with forest conservation.
Right, there's afforestation that can create it.
Yeah.
Redevelopment. That's the three. So you're still going to be subject to some components.
And the city of Annapolis has a stronger forest conservation law than the county, correct?
I'm not sure about that. I think some of that is generated.
I would doubt that, but.
Yeah.
Because you typically want more development in the city, but
You would think
It's 3 to 1.
You would think that's not really- So I'll ask the question again. We have consensus on removing this from our strategy.
So if people consent, if you agree, then you put your thumb up and say, yeah, you have consensus. If you put your thumb down, it means you don't.
count 'em. Have it.
No.
Consensus means if somebody thumbs down, we keep talking.
Somebody has their thumb down, they can either come up with an alternate
So-
proposal or.
Before we go.
Great idea.
I know.
It hurts a little bit, but I'm gonna go on the sake of, other people.
Okay. If you can trade redeveloping the mall, with the trade.
So we still gotta put more trees in.
So by consensus, we determined to strike this one from our list of strategies.
So does that sound like the plan is it should go?
That was very good.
Okay, next.
Well, it's good when it hurts a little, right? Is that how this works? So that's good.
Region
Okay.
4 last week jettisoned one. Region 2 hasn't jettisoned one yet, so now. I mean, it can happen. It's
That's the
okay.
point.
It's okay
We can
to
talk to
say
them.
we don't want that.
We have a lot of strategies, so losing one. is not good.
Yeah.
We've given them plenty.
We have 2 more we
Yeah,
want to
let's
get through
get
tonight,
ready.
so let's. Yeah,
Okay, so the next one, so this strategy attempts to streamline and speed up the development review timeline for affordable housing projects. Essentially to make them more feasible and desirable to build. So it references the Montgomery County Green Tape Program, which it's a program in Montgomery County that, to be eligible for the program, the project has to have at least 20% of the total dwelling units be made available for low to moderately priced dwelling units as established in their policy. So that's just used
Is
as an
that in our Google
example.
Docs? The green tape program.
I think we maybe, I don't know. if we've
How did that get in there
discussed
then? I mean, I think I'd love to find out about it, but I hate to say anything about a strategy when I haven't seen the green tape.
Yeah, I have
You know,
to Google that
exactly.
really quickly, just because I don't recall having a conversation about it either, so.
Yeah,
I think
so-
I like this, but.
So is the objection to not understanding the specific program in Montgomery County? Or
Yeah.
is it-
It's just an example of
Right.
of an accelerated
So then just
development
put-
review
what if you put a
process.
Period.
But it would be nice to
Study
see it,
examples
because
from other
maybe we could
localities.
highlight what we like about it. I don't like to recommend things that I haven't.
They want to just do what Larry says, just fill out a study examples from the localities,
Generic.
of the localities on accelerated program, just look what they did and pick the best
Yeah,
practices.
it might even be a better thing, because that means.
Oh,
that we look at
absolutely.
More programs than just.
Keep in mind when you do these things, the other developments fall behind this. Out there, so. These are incentives you're trying to provide for affordable housing, but it's really a procedural problem. The city and county already ignored it a long time ago. That means my project goes behind someone else that's who's doing it. And
You gotta put some affordable housing. in
Yeah, I
your
know.
project.
That's the question.
Wait, you're saying if they streamline, then you're gonna sit around with your project, but there was another strategy, that's what
Yeah,
I'm
there-
thinking of. There's another
I
strategy,
think
we were
it's our
gonna have
next.
we were gonna have a person that just focuses on it. So if they combined, maybe that would be a good,
Is that?
better strategy.
Did that one make it?
It did, yeah, and I know there was a
Okay.
clarification about, I think you commented about, we should be
You better
explicit about
provide
that
staffing.
being a FTE position, it's not pulling from existing staff.
Which
Yeah.
would save you. from
Exactly,
doing
that would
Right.
satisfy me as.
I would make one proposal change to this, and that's a study successes and challenges from other localities. Because you really, I mean, just studying it, want to see what the pros and cons are.
let's look at it.
So I pulled up the Montgomery County green tape information, and this is kind of interesting. Because it's basically an incentive to provide at least 20% of the total number of dwelling units to be moderately priced dwelling units. So they must have a required threshold, and this is above it, and they give you faster development review if you bump the number of moderately priced dwelling units up to 20%.
It's 50.
Okay, so what they're saying is if you go above that, you can go through a faster process. But see, what we're saying here,
It's just a faster altogether.
yeah, I mean,
Well, that's why it'd be good.
So there's not a whole, honestly, there's not a whole lot of information on it out there, like I tried to research a little bit, and what I have in my little notes here, the green tape team draws from every part of the department's staff, including building, electrical, fire, mechanical, accessibility, zoning, blah, 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 subdivision plan review standards. Applicants receive assistance with filing requirements, regulatory reviews and inspections when a project is in a specific area. There's Silver Spring redevelopment zone was a specific area that they use this program for. If it was in that redevelopment zone, when you submit an application, it would automatically be assigned to a green tape team member who would prioritize that.
That's like a
Project.
separate group.
So
or
it's-
department that-
So they strive to get it permitted within like 2 weeks, which is not always possible for every project, but they strive for a faster timeline with like a dedicated staff person on it.
but that's permits, that's not development review. That's a little bit different. I think going more generic is probably better, and I will tell you that as staff, we always look at what other jurisdictions are doing. I mean, I'm working on something right now that we looked at maybe 5 neighboring jurisdictions, and we found out that they have a best practice that they're already implementing. And we don't have the same thing, so we do look to the neighbors, it's pretty routine. So, I mean, I think this is actually
Do you
great.
want to say permit and development review? Do they have to be called out to permit?
Well,
review process and
you could
development?
say development review and permitting process. Because it's both. Development review happens in the Office of Planning and Zoning. They have the lead, but other agencies are involved. Permitting happens with the Department of Inspections and Permits, also in this building, also involving a variety of agencies, but inspections and permits has the lead. So I think it's good to call out both, because projects can get stuck in any of those processes.
So the suggestion is, okay, you did it, right, take away the specific program, but.
Implement a faster, more streamlined development review and permitting process for affordable housing projects, period. Study successes and challenges from other localities.
Do we also have a similar like incentive for redeveloping areas like the mall where we really want to focus on redevelopment?
Do we have a strategy already for that?
It's similar, it's incentivized. In other words, if we have an area that we really want to focus on, that we
So
want
this is
to be
like a
redeveloped,
commercial.
Targeted
So,
growth areas.
what are the encouragements and incentives to do that versus?
That's within parole.
Yeah, the incentive.
Yeah, we,
I was impressed.
yeah, there is that in the parole plan, but also, I feel like we had that. I'm gonna look. I think we had this countywide in
Okay.
Plan 2040 already.
I got whiplash trying to go back and forth from what we did to what we were working on. Yeah, I'm sorry, I gave up.
I don't think you would want necessarily a redevelopment strategies simply sitting in housing strategies. There's probably a more
Maybe in the
place for it.
If we have that.
You may have,
But we do have, one of our strategies in housing was promote affordable housing in the rural growth management area. These strategic changes to zoning development regulations, as well as through incentives, blah, 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 blah.
But I
That's
do,
one of our.
I took my whole file.
but I will say that when we get into discussion on the other three areas, I'm sure we'll see something there about redevelopment.
But we have it in this area.
Well,
We have it
it's
as
in the
approved.
Old Town Center,
Oh,
not necessarily, because there's plenty of other redevelopment areas.
in Region 7.
I'd say you don't have to cover it here because it's covered this way.
Good.
So
Do you
do,
want to say for that strategy that we just say commercial opportunity growth areas, including but not limited to rural growth management? I write to make contracts, but
Well, I don't think that's in this one.
well, it's in one of them that we approved.
okay, well,
I
let's,
guess I'm decoupling them. I'm saying, let's stay with this one and this one. Either what it needs to.
Okay, and not look at the ones that,
Not now.
okay, we'll go back to
I do
those.
want to look at
Got it.
so I guess the question then is, do we have consensus on this as it's redrafted here? Okay.
Consensus is, by the way, not 100%.
Right.
It's like,
Right, but it requires another round of discussion if somebody doesn't this time around. That's the difference in a Robert's Rules of Order. Somebody votes it down, there doesn't have any more discussion. But if you didn't vote the way everyone else voted, then it's required to go back through and try to get.
So we just started talking about consent. Does that mean-
And no, I have consensus. Anything in the world.
what it says is it's not necessarily.
Well, that's not the rules of consensus unless you all agree ahead of time by consensus that that's.
But you did in your charter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we agreed that you had to talk, but you could, there was a way of saying it for the.
Consensus.
I just brought it up to verify, and it's that continuum.
Yeah.
Consensus continuum, that kind of means it's included in their survey. So
Yes,
I know, I put that in.
But in any case, I think we've achieved it on this one as well.
Can you do me a big favor on this one and do full screen?
Um,
Yeah, my eyes.
Yeah,
are
sorry,
starting
let me
to
go
get
to this slide. Oh, yeah.
Change the view.
It's under that.
Can you just make it
We can-
full screen on?
I think we're gonna connect this too.
Yeah.
Instead of
If
having
you
to
go,
display?
I think
Here,
it's-
you draw the maps.
Okay, you got it?
Yeah, I got it. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, my
Okay.
eyes are really getting tired.
Oh, thanks.
So this one is another one, it's a strategy that seeks to reduce the regulatory requirements for affordable housing units through a variety of proposed methods. One being eliminating the school vesting requirements for income restricted housing or waiving them. So I think right now it's up to 50 units are waived, but one potential option we had on here was increasing that to 100 units exemption from school vesting requirements. But there's a whole bunch of options here. So I think the comments were regarding the school capacity component of it and let's see. Yeah, the school capacity being the biggest concern.
Say that one more
I
time.
said I was though concerned about school capacity. That's my comment.
Yeah, and these were ideas that came out of conversations with our folks at ACDS and such. So these aren't strategies or strategies that we pulled out of thin air. And yet this is one of those where I think something would be really lost if we adopt a strategy. Is this just the first sentence and not some of the bullets afterward?
It really wouldn't be a whole lot.
Right.
If you strip everything else out.
So discussion.
At least for me, Larry's point is, it's reading the same as the original slide against the APF, right? But it's just more to sit there in terms of strategies. I am not like, well, I'm not naive enough to think that could happen anyway, but as a strategy, starting out there, particularly as a parent, of school-age children. Right, so I mean, I agree, just like all of us, we do need these units, we need them in here, just let's not start it.
So you're referring to the last bullet and maybe pull that one out.
Well, like this, to me, these aren't these specific strategies to promote this, and they're all on the backs of the schools, right? That's where I'm reading.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty loud and clearly that people feel like school capacity requirements and development. But there's got to be a reason that those school capacity requirements got put into the county code, because there are county has had problems with crowding. So
And it's just a cycle, right? So then we have a school that's at capacity or full, and like kids aren't getting what they need. Like it's just a vicious. And we need to stop that somehow. And these rules exist for a reason. Whether they choose to follow it after it gets past us, I just think this is really like we're a think tank, and this is really a strategy, right? We're coming up with like start here. Seems like a short change.
But the first one is different. It says, I think in one of the presentations, they said that you go through several steps before you even look at the school capacity? Or what you're saying is, look at the school capacity issue first, before you even start making plans. And if you already know there's a problem.
No, I
I
think,
can tell you where
How does it-
that language comes from. So for the low-income housing tax credit projects, they have to go to the state of Maryland through a round of funding to determine whether they're going to actually get funding for the project. Those programs are very overprescribed. Once they find out whether or not they have funding, so when they originally looked at the property back here, and were like, okay, we're going to go through for the state funding. By the time they get through the state funding, the school may have closed. Capacity may have closed for that school, and now they're back to not having a project. So the idea on the first bullet is you allow the low-income housing tax credit projects to vest earlier so that they know when they go forward to seek state funding, they have the school capacity, that they're not going to be closed out later, because it's an investment for them to do it. So that's really what that first strategy is about.
so
Yeah,
this,
that's
so
what
that,
they
so
told
this, these strategies all to apply about getting low housing income tax credit. But that's a question.
Yeah, affordable housing units would refer to anything that needs low-income housing tax credit funding.
That was not clear to me the way I read it. I thought that was.
That's a good point. Until later bullets, whether that was just another strategy or that's like the whole concept of the strategy.
So, just so I'm understanding, this whole strategy is, and bullet points are relating to projects that are being funded through that low housing income tax.
Correct.
So could that be pulled up to the?
That should be in the first sentence.
I didn't, I'm sorry, I'm a little slow. I didn't interpret it that way. I thought this was just across the board. That might make a difference in terms of how wide open now some of it, how risky you go to school.
So explore options for changing or eliminating school vesting requirements for income restricted housing may not refer specifically to low-income housing tax credit. There's a little mixing and mingling in these.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just taking a minute to read all of them, and the lines are long and the text is
Yeah.
small, and my eyes are old, so just.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess I wasn't, I mean, my comment was about the regulatory relief. Because I don't understand all of the relief that's being proposed here, so I can't support it. Just don't understand what we're talking about.
I
Yeah,
think that
I
first
need to
strat-
think about it.
So I think the way I read that first strategy in terms of getting early relief and sketch plan, I read that as for any kind of affordable going forward, not just.
I think that is,
You only need it for low-income housing tax credit projects. So you might want to change that. I mean, if this even gets off the ground tonight.
could you argue that you want to vest earlier even if you aren't getting funding though? For other reasons?
No.
Well, if I were a private developer and I was considering doing some proportion of affordable housing, that first bullet point is a big element for me. Having certainty earlier in the process.
So could that just be the bullet?
I think that's one tool, but then there are other tools. And so, you know, especially the last, so we've heard a lot about, you know, like connection fees, for example, being a burden. So I think that the fourth bullet, allow affordable housing developments beyond those funded by low-income housing tax credits to be eligible. Oh, no, not that one. Oh, no, it was that one. Wasn't it? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking that maybe for the purposes of our strategies, we're getting too specific. Pardon me, all of these things, I mean, nothing else is quite that detailed in this list. So I'm suggesting maybe we just sort of make it a broader statement that leaves the potential
Yeah.
for that. but
So
not
I
to
think a
try
lot
to
of
define it all.
these, I think a lot of these came out of recommendations from ACDS.
I agree.
I don't know if we want to just give them more power, kind of give them more leeway to come up with what these, changes should be. And leave it at that, or if we want to be explicit here.
Well, first of all, any of these things will require changes to the county code, which means it's got to go through a legislative process. And so let's say they created a bill that had all of this in it. Either the whole bill might not make it through, or the bill may be amended significantly to eliminate some of this. Or they may determine they don't even want to put some of it in the bill because they don't think they can get the bill approved. I mean, you are saying consider regulatory changes. You're not saying make regulatory changes. And you are saying evaluate some of these things. Such changes may include. They may include. So before any legislation would be proposed for this, there would have to be vetting of all of these bulleted points to determine if, what the details are, whether or not it would be viable, and feasible. So I don't know. I mean, I see value in adding the detail, but I also see how you may not want to add the detail.
Yeah, there's
I get it.
heartburn about the impact on schools.
I think the school capacity, alleviating that is, I'm concerned about that, especially moderately low income housing, those families. There's relief from school capacity. They're most likely going, we're talking about Annapolis High School. That's our region. And it's at capacity. So if we start relieving school capacity requirements, we aren't doing anything but making our school problems worse. For our region.
Elementary and middle school.
Even adding units.
Yeah, I
Right, we're
mean.
compounding, it's not, we're not only not.
Tyler, everybody's at capacity.
So if we were just for a second, so this is the agency who's involved in helping create affordable housing. They come back and say, these are the levers we think are able to create. So as we're discussing this, some of the concerns, as I'm hearing that are objectionable, have to do with the school capacity. There are others there that are troublesome to folks. What I'm wondering is, if you made a suggestion that's where you would send it back to them to say, hey, these are the concerns that we have, and can you make some suggestions given kind of our concerns?
Then when do we get to see them again now? Or is it a done deal once they make the recommendation?
I assume there'll be another.
I think this has to get old enough into that where we're trying to capture the comments that you all have made. This is a part of that, and we'll go to the agency and get input. I do kind of wonder if, I wonder if just eliminating the last two bullets.
Can you explain bullet 3 to me? What are the pilot agreements?
Pilot stands for payment in lieu of taxes. They are specific agreements that are. I don't know a lot about pilots. I'm going to be very honest, but I believe that it is an agreement that happens between the developer and the executive may be involved in it, but ultimately they have to be approved by the county council. So it's a payment in lieu of taxes. It's some kind of financial agreement that is beneficial to both the county and the developer, but may be different than the way it normally happens. I don't know if the three of you have more information, but we can also get more information and come back to the next meeting.
So I think, tell me if I'm kind of summarizing this. I think we're not coming to consensus on this. We want more information. So I think what I'm hearing is potentially like reworking this to reference the low-income housing tax credit more upfront, And then just can we, the concerns related to the impact on school capacity, maybe eliminating portions that are going to exacerbate school capacity issues in the region. Let's capture those, send this back to our partners and see where we go from there and come back to you with.
So the
Something.
timeline for doing that would be the next meeting, we would revisit this with additional
I don't know if it'll be
information.
by the next meeting. The next meeting, I want us to focus on the land use and the other 3 surveys. So it may need to be the meeting following.
So the process would be, you would share the information, additional information in advance of a meeting to discuss this?
Yeah, I'm envisioning at a minimum, we're gonna have, I want to at some point give you all of the strategies to see in one go and any changes that are being recommended from that based on comments from you all or from outreach to agencies based on these comments and that. And then some of these, this one will be one that we'll need to discuss again and either thumbs up or thumbs down it.
Yeah, this one just covers a lot of ground. It's a lot of pieces there, and I think there's consensus with the concern about school capacity, and I'm just not sure about the rest of it, so. We ask is that it go back to the powers that need to consider what the strategies are. This group is kind of saying that we're really not interested in simplifying the industry. Is that what I'm hearing?
Okay, we'll do that.
Is that enough to close this one tonight?
I think so.
Well,
Let me make one more comment on defense, just to tie in with the continuum. Okay. So in that continuum, if you look at those choices that Patrick and Desiree sent on each one of these questions. So one is, I love it. One is, I can live with it. One is, I don't really like it, but I can support it. You know, I'll let the group decide. All 3 of those mean thumbs up. The only one that's thumbs down is, I can't live with it the way it's proposed right now. So there's thumb up. Anything on the continuum that's past, red, you can put your thumb up. Anything that's in the red, thumb down. And then you come up with an alternate proposal.
great, but Cindy, just to follow up on that. In the charter, we did talk about what consensus meant. What is the description? You know what that is? Have that there? I'm not sure we needed this charter, but I couldn't find it on the website. I don't think that's.
No, we do need to put the website with the amendment from last
Yeah.
week too.
I
It's
just-
on the list. I haven't forgotten it.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we get that circulated to everyone and we kind of start that moving next week with that, just to walk through.
Okay.
So, I think we're close, but I think we're amendments to what that.
I think the big issue in the charter was, when do you take it to a vote?
Right.
Because at first it said something else, but anyway, then you pulled out the plan 2040 and it had some other very specific language that we had to put in bylaws.
Yes.
It sort of is the opposite of consensus. Like if you can't reach consensus, then you vote.
Yeah.
So that's in
That's the-
your charter.
We had to put it in because that was the plan.
Let's do this. Let's get the information to the group so we can look at it. We'll have a brief discussion about it the next meeting. So, right. Just make sure we're all on the same page. I think that's a quick discussion. So we have a lot of voting to do.
Right. And I'll tell you, one other tiny piece of parliamentary procedure, which is how you open and close the meeting. You don't need to make a motion to adjourn. You could just say the meeting. The chair can, the chair has to say it. The chair can.
Well, is there any other items you wanted to cover tonight?
I will just say I have a real problem voting on strategies that I haven't read the reference document. So if there's stuff that one of the departments is referencing, if there's any way you can throw it into our docs, that would be really helpful. I mean, I know I can
You know, the
Google, but
hyperlink.
that takes.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
So if you have that concern about what happens in the next 3 of those surveys, if you could just make a note of that, I'd like to see this, because there's a space to do that.
And I mean, I did in my comments. I needed to.
Yeah,
And if you, I was gonna, I don't know who- I think you were the one who brought it up originally, if you generally like the strategy, but you have, there's an issue you have, but you're okay with moving forward, you can put it, just make it, yeah, just make it a comment, like,
in a second.
you know, this, and we will then compile those comments and, you know, if it substantially changes something about the strategy, then.
So, yeah, I just kind of said agree, but
So I don't like this part. Right?
Yeah.
So our next meeting is January 25th next week.
Thursday.
I'm sorry, yeah, 26th, thank you. I'm looking at the one date that's on here, or the one that's bolded, because
Yeah, right.
look at your surveys
Yeah.
and please get your comments to us by the 25th. That is the more important thing.
Yeah.
No, we actually need you here on the 26th too,
Yeah.
but
But you actually like.
yeah, so.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, we will meet here the 26th, at 6 p.m. and, yeah, take some time this weekend on the strategies, and that's all I'm gonna say on that. All right,
Fair enough. Well, that's all we have. Thanks everyone for making it tonight. With some little round. So appreciate everyone's input. We'll see you later.
No, have the chair.
We're adjourned.
Never allowed.
Okay.
All right.